And let's now turn to the national front, where the political landscape is looking pretty rocky for Democrats all across the country. This as many of them distance themselves from President Obama, who currently has an approval rating sitting at about 40%, which is only slightly better than the approval rating that George W. Bush received in October of '06. And the congressional outlook, not looking that much better, as we discussed last segment, according to a Fox News poll out this week showing that only 13% of American voters approve of the job that Congress is doing, while 81% disapprove. Political reporter Isenstadt, he joins us now with an actual election outlook. So thanks for a few minutes. And anybody, if they're a betting man, right now the trending, let alone, from the Silvers to the Sabatos, everybody's putting this at basically 2-to-1 odds here that at the end of the night, not only do Republicans pick up seats in the House, but they probably control the Senate too, right?
Yeah, I'd say that's about right. Look, overwhelmingly the odds are that this is a Republican year, and so Republicans need 6 seats to win control of the Senate. And if you look at the polls, it suggests that that's probably going to happen. But at the same time, there is a little bit of uncertainty. Some of these surveys shows that a number of races across the country are very close, and so it's a little hard to tell in a year like this.
Well, let's first guess in front of Tuesday if some of the projections are right. There's a few different schools of thought on it. Obviously, the president is unpopular, and we'll get into that. But do you think Democrats will regret that they kept the president not only at arm's length, but even try to stay at arm's length on the policy front, too? You don't hear a lot about either gun control, Affordable Care Act might as well be an anathema. Will they regret, because at the end they're going to get pinned with it anyway, that they ran away from these issues instead of embracing them for better or worse?
Well, you're making a good point, which is that this is sort of a gamble that Democrats made. They said, look, we're going to run away from the president. We're going to keep him, as you say, at arm's length. It's interesting to kind of contrast how Democrats treated President Obama in 2014 versus how Republicans treated George W. Bush in 2006. Now, Bush was unpopular then too. The difference was that you had a lot of Republicans back then who said, look, we're going to campaign with George W. Bush. We know he's unpopular, but we know, as you say, that we're going to get pinned by it even if we campaign with him or not, so why not try to make the most of it? This is a situation for Democrats where they have now been under a barrage of Republican advertising, the vast majority of which has connected them to the president. So, running away from the president, trying to get independence from him, it's not going to work in most of these cases.
A few of the poll numbers that came out really jumped out at me, and the perception from so many out there that kind of what's the point, this malaise, that it doesn't really matter who's in charge, nothing will change. Where do you pin most of that on? Just a general dissatisfaction with government, or the Democrats never really sold and this president never really sold what they've done for 6 years? Where do you put that? Because I think a lot of people not only are staying home, but they're throwing up their hands saying it doesn't make a difference what happens Tuesday.
Right. There's sort of a difference in this midterm election versus the last midterm election in 2010. In 2010, you had a wide-reaching anger at the president for perceived overreach, particularly as it related to the Affordable Care Act. This time around, you see a general sense of malaise and unhappiness. And one interesting thing to think about as we get closer to Tuesday is could this create some surprises in some races? You just don't know. I mean, we could see a number of incumbents in the Senate and the House lose, some folks who haven't necessarily been on the radar. You're seeing a lot of Democratic incumbents in the House over the last couple of weeks. You really get the sense they've become really worried. Folks in places like Santa Barbara, Las Vegas, typically liberal areas, Democratic incumbents in those places have become worried. And so you could see some real surprises on Tuesday.
I know you've covered this. Steve Israel from Long Island, the Democratic congressman, he said, where's the cavalry in terms of outside money? Why is outside money on the Democratic side, especially compared to Republican money, sitting on the sidelines this midterms with so much at stake?
Well, you look at Democratic money versus Republican money, and there actually was a lot of Democratic money coming in earlier. It's just that it came in early and Republican money came in late. But there's a real difference right now between how the two parties receive donations. Democrats are largely funded by small dollar donors, and Republicans, a lot of these Republican outside groups are funded by large donors. And so what you had happen early on this year was you had lots of Democratic small donors giving the National Party checks. And then what you had happen was, Republicans were behind, and over the last couple of months, Republicans have really got motivated. Some of their bigger donors have provided checks to groups like American Crossroads and others. And what you've had happen in the last couple of weeks is Republican groups, particularly on the House side, have really swamped Democrats. And it's created some momentum for the GOP as they try to build on their current 17-seat majority. Potentially, you could see House Republicans pick up 10 seats or 15 seats potentially. And if they can do that, if they can win around a dozen seats, it would give Republicans their biggest majority since Harry Truman was president.
And finally, if it follows suit, Alex, and we do the autopsy later, it's as simple as this. I look at some of the numbers in terms of where the president is now versus where he is before, not just in overall, but by some of the demographics. And among millennials, he's down 14 points. Even just back in 12. Democratic voters who recognize him, he's down about 10 points there. Moderate voters, he's down 12 points. Hispanic voters, 11. African American voters, 13%. Simply put, is that why Democrats are going to be in so much trouble Tuesday?
Well, we always expected that Democrats would have a harder time turning out their voters in a midterm election than in a presidential year. That's the historical trend for the party, and it's why they've kind of struggled in midterm elections as of late. But it's become a particular problem for Democrats this year in terms of reprising the coalition that reelected the president just 2 years ago. And the president is down across the board. You're absolutely right. You get the sense as these races play out here over the final days that President Obama is almost kind of irrelevant. He's almost like wallpaper. You get the sense he's nowhere. He's campaigning in a few governor's races here and there in a few really blue states. But man, he is just, he just does not seem central to these races in any real way, except for the fact, of course, in Republican advertising.
It will be very interesting to see how Tuesday shakes out. Alex, thank you so much for the time.
Thank you, sir.
All right, when we come back, we're going to share our election endorsements. That when we return.